Değerli izleyiciler, sevgili konuklarımız, Fikir ve Önderleri yayınımıza hepiniz hoş geldiniz efendim. Dünyanın farklı noktalarından, farklı üniversitelerden çok değerli akademisyenleri, Türkiye'den değerli akademisyenleri, danışmanları ve gerçekten de iş dünyasındaki teori kısmına ciddi katkılarda bulunan değerli isimleri ağırladığımız show'umuzda bu akşam da çok değerli bir konuğumuz bizlerle birlikte olacak. Ama konumuza geçmeden önce çok kısa birkaç hatırlatmayı sizlerle paylaşmayı arzu ediyorum. Zaten bizi izleyenler biliyorlar ama olsun, söylemek gerekiyor. 3 kanalda aynı anda yayındayız efendim. Instagram'da, Twitter'da ve YouTube'da varız. Bunlardan herhangi birinden bizi izleyebilirsiniz. Ama bize soru sormayı arzu ediyorsanız sizleri YouTube kanalımıza bekliyoruz. YouTube kanalındaki o chat kutusundan bize sorularınızı aktarabilirsiniz. Ben de konuşmamızda uygun olan yerlerde ve kalanları da konuşmamızın sonunda değerli konuğumuza aktarmayı elimden geldiğince gerçekleştirmeye çalışacağım. Bugün çok değerli bir konuğumuz var. Konuğumuz aslına bakarsanız liderlik iletişimi, liderlerin iletişimi ve özellikle de iletişim teorisi üzerine çok değerli katkılar veriyor akademik camiada. Ve bu konuda sadece teoride kalmıyor, aynı zamanda birçok büyük kurumun liderine de iletişim konusunda destek oluyor, koçluk veriyor. Kendisi Dartmouth Tech School'dan sevgili Julie Lang. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Serdar. It's a pleasure to be here, and a good evening to you.
Yeah, from our chat before the live show, I see that it's snowing there. So how are things there? How is this pandemic going through?
Yes, it's a beautiful, beautiful snowy February day at 8 below Celsius. So it's a cold one. I'm happy to be inside with you, but watching absolutely huge snowflakes outside. So beautiful day, but typical winter here.
Yeah, it's plus 20 Celsius here today, like a day from the summer. So what we call is like a fake summer. And I think in a couple of days, we will be experiencing a heavy snow here in Istanbul. At least this is what weather forecast says. Yeah. So, Julie, let's start with the broad question. I always like to shoot a broad question for the beginning for my guests here. I know that your research focuses on communication theory as well as leadership and leadership communications. So what is the basis of leadership communication? What is your take about the main structure of leadership communications?
Such a big question that we're going to start with.
So 3 hours.
Yeah, right. I think when I think about leadership and communication, I think about moving to the end of something. In other words, when I think about leadership communication, I think about why are we communicating? What's the reason? Because at the end of the day, we're communicating because we want our audience, and I use that word broadly, to do something differently, to think differently, to act differently, to feel differently. And so to me, the essence of really leadership and communication is getting in touch with that audience and knowing, having an intention about what we want to happen, what we want to change, so that we can basically step back from that. And everything we're doing is really working towards that goal or that intention. And I know that it's probably a big answer to your big question, Serdar, but I think it's really important, and we often miss that. You know, in simple words, what's our goal or what's our intention? Clarity around that can, I think, bring so much more richness to both the process and the output of leadership communication.
Yeah. As much as I get from your answer, there are 2 parts, the process, or maybe 3 parts, the message, the process, and the output. And most of the time, when we think about communication, we start with, okay, we have to have a message to convey. We have to have different channels to convey it. And then we have to have an audience that is going to receive the message. We thought that that's all. But there is a very important point missing, which is the action point, I guess. This is what action or what reaction your message creates from the audience and what you trigger with this message. Do you think this is a little bit underrated part of the communication?
Absolutely. And I think the way you framed it is exactly right. And I think our natural tendency is to push the message, right? It's to push. What are we going to say? What do we need to say? How are we going to say it? But I believe that the pulling part that you described, that is the what do we want to get back, that's the underrated part. And it's the most important part. And if we start with what we want that to be, then we'll craft our message to that audience in a way to bring that back again. So yes, and I think underrated, understated, absolutely, you are right about that. The other benefit of not understating it, of spending time looking there, we're more efficient, right? We spend less time in the noise and let's try this and let's try that and what about this and what about that. Instead, it's much more pointed. And so we're really saying, here's our audience. This is what we want them to do or what we want to get out of that. How do we make that happen? The sequencing is different that way.
Right. Maybe for the last 10 or 15 years, there has been a lot of new medium coming through. There has been a lot of new channels coming through. 10 years ago, it was a little bit or relatively easier for a leader to communicate effectively because we have conventional channels. We have town halls for the employees. We have TV or newspapers or magazines for the general audience, and that's it. So leaders appear a couple of times in a year. They come and say big words, and this was the maybe the external communication part of it. For internal, we have town halls, we have memos and things. But today we have been talking about a lot of things: social media and YouTube, and even Clubhouse is becoming a phenomenon here in Turkey as well. So lots of different channels and lots of different formats. How does these new developments affect the process and the essence of leadership communication?
That is another big question, Serdar. And I think I'm far from an expert on the panoply of possibilities here with communication. My work tends to be very, I'll say, intimate in a way that we're doing a lot of skill building, whether it's in a meeting situation, a presentation situation, a discussion situation, with or without kind of PowerPoint slides. That's where I focus most of my time. But I think even to take one step outside of that, towards the many options that you're talking about, decision-making is a big part of this. Understanding what the possibilities are and which ones fit what situations. We've gone from simply on a, for example, internal basis, especially with remote coming in, how complex is this message or how simple is it? If it's simple, there's probably one set of mediums we should look at. If it's more complex, there's another set of mediums. And then within each of those, is it written? Is it verbal? Does it include video or not? Do we want feedback from it? Is it interactive or is it more one way? Right? There's so much involved in that decision making that I think one obvious answer to your question is that we need more expertise and more people within companies that are helping leaders to navigate what are the possibilities and what's the best fit. It's far more complex than it ever used to be.
Right. And also another point is that we are going through a pandemic, and this is making things a little bit complicated. Mm-hmm. We have received a question from the audience saying that how has the leadership communication changed during the pandemic in terms of especially internal communications, maybe communications within the company, how this pandemic is affecting the communications, the leadership communications, if I may say.
Yeah. So I think that, the pandemic has brought us opportunities. And I think there is a silver lining here. I'm going to take a positive approach to this because I do believe, and I work with not only the students at the tech school, but also work with professional service firms. And we're watching as we're all struggling to figure out what does this mean to communicate virtually. I think that what we're learning is productivity does happen. Communication does happen. Connection does happen. Inspiration can happen, but we've got to learn how to do it. And I think, again, looking at a pre-pandemic world and a post-pandemic world from an internal communication standpoint, you and I talked about this before we started, so much of what we were doing in person works when we're remote, but we can't make assumptions on remote. We have to be more explicit, more transparent. I think we also have to be more brief. Brevity plays well when we have Zoom fatigue and when we're spending so many hours on the computer. We have to be thinking more about what is our messaging and how can we get that across in a way that's clear and succinct and structured. So that's a long-winded, where does this go? But this remote is not going away. And this has given us an opportunity to get quickly up a learning curve, to figure out what's important and what's not. And I think we're really starting to see now, as we're starting to shift with the vaccines into a world where choices can be made outside of remote. Now it's going to be interesting to see what happens, what direction things are going to move in.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of remote, you have also mentioned that you have been teaching these kind of skills for years, and also you have been partnering with lots of companies and executives about how to do it better. So what are your observations throughout this pandemic time? How has this remote communication challenges or leverages the communications of the leader?
Yeah, I think that what we've learned in working with this is that by setting up situations for success and being more deliberate about that, there's a much higher probability of being able to get really specific results. That's no different than it was pre-pandemic in a meeting situation. But I believe that remote has forced us to be more explicit about audience participation, expectations, content sharing, how that's done and when that's done. So I think that the deliberate nature of it has made it more successful because we've spent more time on the communications component than we maybe had before.
Right. Regarding the communication component, Julie, maybe another interesting thing is you mentioned that this is also a question for the audience. You mentioned that communication should be much more explicit, much more interactive, maybe. And what are some tools or things that leaders can use in order to streamline this? Is there some tactics or tools or ways to make it better?
Yeah, I'll talk about one that we teach that we use a lot that we call rules of engagement. Okay. And I think when you hear this, it's going to seem obvious, but we don't do it enough. It's a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah.
So I think in terms of setting up a meeting situation, I mean, we already talked about the first question is, do we even need a meeting, right? Do we have to get together? And if we do, then there should be for a set of reasons, right, that we're getting together. So setting up expectations ahead of time and then in the meeting is what I'm saying are critical. And I think of kind of 4 pieces to that. One is just building rapport at the beginning of the meeting, right? Getting people talking. It's no different than when we teach. People talking sooner means more interaction, right? That can help be more successful. Setting out who's in the meeting and why. And if there are people who are there that we don't know why they're there, they probably don't need to be there. So I think that's being honest about who's a part of that meeting and what role you're asking them to play. You want a heightened level of communication. You say, Serdar, thank you. I'm so glad you could make it today. In your role as CFO in the organization, we're going to be talking about this. I would really like to hear your input.
Right.
What risks did we miss here? What gets you most excited? Is this going to be able to return the level that you're looking for, right? Absolutely grabbing people and bringing them in. I think the other thing is just the purpose of it. What's going to happen at the end of the meeting? If we don't know where we're going, how do we know how to get there? And the last thing is people just want to know, like, how long is the meeting going to be? What are we going to do? And how do I participate? Am I supposed to sit here and listen? Then I'm probably going to turn my camera off. I'm probably going to mute my mic, and I'll see you later. And by the way, I got a lot of other things to do, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Julie. For instance, it is much more easier to put all the emails of the different people to 2 sections and invite them to a Zoom meeting, and nearly half of them are not required actually. So people sit there, they just turn off their microphones and video cameras, and they do different things. I was chatting with a CEO a couple of days ago, and he was saying me that, Serdar, I had a 1.5 hour meeting on Zoom, but I was not required actually, but my superior, just the regional CEO, invited me there. So I took my phone, I go for a walk, I take a walk with my dog, then I go to the grocery store, and then people are talking and talking, and I do my grocery shopping, I come back. Oh, that was really very effective because I have done all the shopping. I walk my dog throughout the meeting. So that was really a very striking example for me. And it is becoming much more easier for people to invite very unneeded people, if I may say, to the audience of those kind of meetings. And actually,
comment on that, Serdar, because I think there's something here. Right, we have a new definition of productivity, right? Productivity means I got to the grocery store during a conference call. A little bit of data, some of it's dated and some of it not so much, but I think it's worth sharing. First of all, what else are people doing during an employee conference call? And this is HBR data from a few years ago, but other work, 65%. The other work is going to the grocery store. Sending emails, 63%. Eating or making food, 55%. Going to the restroom, 47%. Texting, 44%, right? We're doing anything but paying attention unless we're asked to pay attention. So let me say the flip side of that. Recent research, this was 82% of participants on remote conference calls, 82% said they are less likely to multitask when their cameras are on. So when my camera's on, I'm accountable to you as my host. I'm 82% less likely to multitask. There's a pretty good reason to get cameras on. And, microphones, you can do as you wish. But I often say in a small audience, please, you don't need to mute. Let's have a conversation. Right. And of course, like on Zoom, you can see people and you can see if they're muted or not. So those are ways to grab people and bring them into the conversation.
Right. And it's also very weird. You go, Zoom meeting, and let's say we have 5 people, 3 of them have their cams on and 2 of them are off. So what you going to do? Are you going to turn your camera on or off? So it's really becoming an interesting issue, Julia, I guess.
Yeah, but I think but you've got to, you also have to, in those cases, in the first 30 seconds, if they haven't turned their camera on, they're not going to. So our onus as leaders of these meetings are to get people engaged literally in the first 30 to 60 seconds. No cameras then means probably no camera throughout. You probably lost them from the very start.
Right. What about the motivation issue, Julie? Because one of the very important purpose of having an effective leadership communication is motivating employees. And it's much more easier when you have face-to-face interaction, when you have physical contact with other people. But remote, I have been reading a lot of articles, even in our magazine as well, about the challenge of motivating people remotely. How do you see this phenomenon, and is there a way to overcome this?
Yeah, I think motivation comes on the screen and through our voices and through human connection. I think the motivation, again, comes from getting people engaged. So a few little tips and tricks there. As I said, rapport building at the beginning, getting people to turn their cameras on, using people's names, not once, but repeatedly. Motivating in sense of using a name and as I was role playing with you in the CFO situation, but literally saying to people at the beginning, here, I'm going to ask you some things. This is what I'm going to ask you and when. And so now they're on alert, right? They're ready for that. I think also just slowing down the conversation, not to let it drag, but to allow people to have a give and take, to allow silences or pauses for people to jump in, and really literally to be reaching out and grabbing people by name can be highly motivating and engaging. Right. Now, that also doesn't go on for hours. So I think the length of the meeting, if it has to be a longer meeting, take lots of breaks. Give people a chance to turn their cameras off.
Right.
Walk
That's fair.
around, go outside, do whatever they need to do. But I think there really are ways to actively engage. We just need to practice them, and that means letting go of a little bit of control.
Mhm.
And that can be hard for some people, right? It means I'm going to
Right.
talk a little less and I'm going to give up a little bit.
Right. One of the things I suffer from these Zoom meetings is that people put meeting back to back and back to back and back to back. I start with like 9 a.m., then 10, 11, 12. So I think we need a kind of an empathy while we are scheduling the meetings as well. So give
Yes.
me a break, 15 minutes of something for relaxation, or to have a coffee, or at least to have some time for breakfast. So
Yes.
I think the scheduling part is also very important.
Well, and let's talk about the time management component of that, because I think if you have control over your calendar, this is what I've started to do. I just have these 15-minute or half-hour breaks where I write block.
Right.
Nobody sees that it says block, but it gives me a chance to process the meeting I just came out of, to get ready for that class that I'm going to stand up and walk around. And we know at the end of the day that back-to-back meetings like you're talking about, you can't be on the whole time. You can't be productive the whole time. You know, we're not heroes here. We don't need to be heroes. We need to create time for ourselves and for the people who are working for us. And I think by modeling good behavior there, we've got a chance for them to do the same. This isn't easy. It isn't easy.
Yeah.
We've got lots of challenges. We need space. And that taking care of ourselves alongside of our work means it's much more sustainable.
Right. Actually, I think ones who are moderating or managing the meeting should be more explicit, should be more informative about, or should be better moderators for the remote meetings, because in physical meeting you can read some of the gestures, you can see some of the clues and cues from people, but in the digital it is not like that. So you have to be much more aware, you have to be much more concentrated, focused to the meeting, and act like a moderator in order to keep people engaged throughout the meeting, I guess. So this is why meetings should be much more shorter, because you need to be more focused, and you cannot stay focused for 3 hours in a meeting.
Right. So a couple things about that. I think, first of all, Zoom is the platform we use, so I talk from that more than others. The chat function is fantastic. The chat function, you can ask a question. And when you're doing that in a room live and you say, I want to hear from the 10 people around the table, you've committed, 15, 20 minutes to that. If you say in chat, I'd like to hear from everyone, give a very specific question and see what comes through, that can be fantastic. And it's a way for people to both be contributing and reading what others, and you can build on each other. So there's actually an efficiency as well as an engagement, I think, that comes with that chat function.
Right. And also lots of other engagement functions are being included in those kind of platforms. You see this different show of emotions, or you can just click to a button, say faster or slower, and those kind of things. I think the platform is also improving.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, we use the raise hand function, and we use the applause function and things like that. And I think you can encourage that. Breakouts, it sounds very classroomy, but I have to say, at least when I run meetings, I do have times where I say, let's get together in pairs and talk about something and then come back together. Can do that easily with a breakout. Guess what happens in a breakout? When you put people in pairs or in triplets, everybody's talking. So everyone's engaged, only they're in these different groups. And then when you come back, you have more to talk about because they've shared between them. And again, it's very much a classroom. I think of it as a classroom method. It works great if you're trying to problem solve. and it gets everybody engaged and re-engaged. Yeah. So that's another little, sort of tip.
Yeah, so having everyone at a single session is effective, but sending people to different breakout rooms, pairs and triplets, and then asking them to discuss on certain issues and come back, that will be much more effective. Yeah, that's really a very simple thing, but I haven't thought about this.
But Serdar, the other thing is, you think about when we do that in person, and you and I have done this, you have to give people 10 minutes to get to their room because they're going to check their phones and they're going to get some coffee and stop in the restroom. And then not everybody's back all together, right? It takes a lot of transition time when you're in person. It's slick with Zoom, right? You send them there. You can have a little clock up at the top that has a countdown as to how long. Zoom, they're back in again. And so there's no transition time. In fact, it can be a little bit jarring, but it means you can do more in less time.
Right. One of the very important things that we have been talking about through this pandemic in terms of communication, Julie, is getting and taking feedback. Because we have been emphasizing the importance of feedback, especially in innovative environments or in any kind of company. But with this things going remote, it is much more harder, I guess, to get and to give feedback. What is your, do you subscribe to this assumption? And what's your perspective about having a more effective feedback sharing throughout this remote systems?
Yeah, I do subscribe to it, Serdar. I mean, I think feedback's what helps all of us get better. And the more we can build it in so it's short and specific and we can build on it and move on, the better it is. So 2 ideas on feedback. One is just on meetings. And I find it can be really effective to spend the last, say, 5 minutes of a meeting and say, we're going to stop here. Let's check in. And again, you could use chat if you're doing this remotely. One thing that went really well, what is it? One thing that did not go really well, then you can have a discussion and say, based on those 2 things, and specifically what didn't go well, what should we do differently next time? That plus minus change, if you will, is the way I think of it, doesn't need to take a lot of time. It can be extremely effective. Next meeting, here's the challenge, is to take whatever suggestions came out of that, remind everyone that here's what we came up with. We're going to give this one a try. So you do something different, same thing at the end of the meeting, what worked well, what didn't, what do we want to do differently? That way it's not personal per se, right? It's a we, how can we make these meetings better? And yet you're expecting everyone to chime in. So that's one thought from the process side. And I think that's a cultural meeting culture sort of idea. The other thing, and I know you're familiar with this, is we use personal feedback, personal professional feedback, and I think this can be effective as well. We happen to have come up with a very quick, easy way to give feedback that we call BRIO, B-R-I-O.
Brio, yeah.
Brio, yeah, like con brio in Italian. Brio is interesting in that it stands for behavior, reaction, instead, and overall. So BRINO. Classic feedback used to be, I'm going to say something good about what you did, and then I'm going to tell you what you did wrong, and then I'm going to do good again. So it was a sandwich.
Right.
Research has said that initial good news, nobody hears it, right? It's completely discounted because what we really want to hear is, what did we do wrong that we could do better? So this Brio is an open sandwich. It starts with what didn't work. And it basically says, I noticed something, here's what it is, stated as a fact, if you will, my reaction to it, and a suggestion on how to make it better.
Right. Can you give me an example about this?
Yes.
Consider that I have been disturbing you a lot throughout this interview, and you would like to give me an feedback about this. What will be your sentences?
So, Serdar, I noticed that you've been asking a lot of questions, and
so this is B part.
That's the B part. I noticed you've been asking a lot of questions, and my reaction, if this were a negative, in fact, my reaction is that I'm not always able to keep up with you. It's going quite quickly. So instead, maybe if we could slow it down a little bit and spend a little bit more time, I think I'd be able to track with you a little bit better. And overall, the big plus, and what I really appreciate is the way you frame your questions, because it makes it really easy for me to understand where it is that you're coming from.
Right. So it is BRIO, behavior, reaction, instead of, and overall.
That's correct.
So having this structured method in remote also works for having a short maybe and to the point kind of feedback.
Yes, I'll give you an example. I've just come out of a 3-hour class, which amazingly goes very fast. I have 12 students in the class. And so they present, and after they present, and they're presenting with PowerPoint now, the other students give them with brio feedback. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine the degree of specificity in a very short time period that can be shared. And that can be extremely helpful. We record them as well, and we haven't talked about that. But Serdar, one of the beautiful things about Zoom is there's a record button. Now, I'm not suggesting we need to record and look at all our meetings later, because I don't think that's going to happen. But if you want to see what you look like and hear what you sound like and perceive yourself as a leader, as a meeting manager, as a presenter, record yourself on Zoom and look at it and find out, is this somebody that you would want to listen to? Is this somebody who motivates you, right? You just, pretend you're not you, do the out-of-body experience. I think when we use this brio method on Zoom, it's the same thing in that I'm asking people to see themselves as others see them. And we're articulating what we're seeing and hearing in a way that says, here's my gift to you of some feedback. What you choose to change and don't is completely up to you. But in the course of 2, 3, 4 minutes, you can hear from 5 or 6 people. And those are valuable data points given with empathy, given with genuine, I want to help you get better.
Yeah, that's really interesting point, Julie. Another thing that I would like to ask is giving, and especially giving bad news, because especially in the beginning of the pandemic, there has been a lot of bad things going through. People lost their lives, people get sick, families are just stuck in houses, so everybody was anxious and stressed. So and overall we have lost the physical contact, and we are on remote communication systems. So is there a way to have a better structuring and executing of giving negative news or bad news throughout these times?
Yeah, a couple things. And I think our cultures may or may not be the same in this area. So I'll put this caveat out here. My philosophy about bad news is call it what it is. So I think the worst example is, trying to be soft or just play down whatever it is. And then you finally kind of sort of get there. And I think instead, what you want to be doing is to say right up front, Serdar, I've got some bad news and we need to talk about it, right? It basically says, honestly, transparently, there's bad news here. And with compassion, sharing that bad news and having a conversation about it. But it's not about avoiding it. It's about putting it on the table, putting the facts out there, letting that person hear it, own it, react in whatever way they're going to react, and work through it. So to me, that's the really human part of working with bad news. And it takes courage to do that, but I think it's also incredibly powerful.
Right. And also framing the situation or the bad news is also important, I guess, because there are lots of ways to communicate it, and it depends on what context you are in, what situation the receiver is in. So I guess the framing element also plays a huge role in terms of giving the bad news.
I think that's exactly right. I think I hope it's one-on-one or small group. I mean, even if you have a layoff situation or whatever, talking to people individually, I think, is really important there, and not making it a group decision. Lead time is important. Again, at least having, if not an in-person distance conversation, at least having a video, the benefit of the feedback. Or you may choose phone, you may choose audio with no video in those situations. But my preference is generally just to bring everything and have that conversation. But I agree with you. I think framing it, finding your voice and how you want your voice to deliver the message, and it's consistent with that, is a challenge. And by the way, I think that's an area, if a person hasn't done bad news, that's a good place to practice on Zoom.
Right.
Do it a couple times, put yourself in the seat of the audience.
Right.
And
maybe record yourself and then watch how you're going to do it.
Yes, because I think by doing it either like on a Zoom recording, or the other thing I tell people is just to use the audio function on your voice memo on your phone. Say something out loud and play it back. Pretty quickly, you'll say, "Oh, that sounded really great. Wow, that didn't sound great at all. I went off, on a tangent. I went into too much detail. It wasn't structured." That's a quick way to get away from writing things out until you think they're perfect. Mm-hmm. And instead letting your voice help you understand what your message is and how you want to deliver it. Right. Another old statistic, but it's the old, and this goes back to your bad news question. 90% is not what you say, but how you say it. And, the bottom line there is, if how you say something is inconsistent with the message, the audience doesn't believe you, right? The head and the heart aren't going together. And I think bad news, because it's uncomfortable to deliver, we have to figure out how to bring the message together with how we say it. And if there's anything that's disingenuous, that's a miss, right?
Right. That's also very important. Actually, we are approaching the end of the show, surely but slowly. And there are a couple of questions from the audience, Julie. Let me take some time to shoot them to you. Let me start with the final one. Our friend from the audience says, what would be the best frequency of a CEO to talk to the organization? Based on your experience? Is it going to be there every minute, every day, or a healthy frequency of interacting with the overall employees?
Yeah, I think it is healthy frequency. I think that's the right word, right words. And what is that healthy frequency then is the question. I believe in these times that we do need reassurance. We need consistency of message. We need a vision that takes us not only into the near future, but the further future. And that's changing all the time. So is it more than what it was pre-pandemic, that frequency? I think so. I think it's a shorter time period. But I also believe that there's an opportunity there to set up, if a CEO is not already doing that, a pretty regular check-in so that the employees can expect to hear at those intervals, whether it's every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or once a month or whatever it is. Times they are changing, right? Some things we can predict and some things we can't. And I think particularly because we're at this time when is it going to be remote or in person, and how will we decide, and what does that mean for our company culture? What does it mean for my job and my future from the perspective of an employee? Very regular interaction, I think, is extremely important.
Right. Yeah. Maybe there are some regular checks in going through, but when there is something emergent, I think the leaders should be accessible or should be out there telling from the horse's mouth to that the things are going this way or that way. So that will also stop rumors and assumptions and all those negative news going through the organization.
Yes, and I think that's where, Professor Argenti talks about crisis management and having that point of view and getting out there immediately is critical. And I think being ready for those times is what we can do from a planning perspective. Absolutely. Yeah.
Another question is about trust, Julie. Remote working is forcing the corporate cultures to be moving from controlling to empowering, because this is lots of decentralized environment we are going through, and this brings a lot of need for trust. People should trust each other. So how can we make it easier for leaders to create this trust, maybe with communication?
Yeah, trust is, I think, very much where we are moving towards. I think that to be willing to let go of some control and share that, and everybody does that in their own way, through words, through actions, through modeling behavior. I believe that trust is built one person at a time and one action at a time. So I think being very deliberate about decisions that are made and why, transparency is important. And I think allowing people to have, just like we talked about, taking breaks, shorter days, respecting family, respecting the difficulty of this, I think is very much a part of what this is all about. I think that the building of trust comes with time. And I think at the beginning of this pandemic, everyone was, this was the cameras and we were recording hours and recording phone calls, and there was this big brother attitude. And I think what the most unbelievable outcome has been this stepping back and watching people step up to their jobs, to their careers, to their responsibilities. And we're seeing and feeling trust across the board. I think that's great. I think the challenge that the leaders of this world will always have is how much time is spent up front saying, these are my expectations, and what's the monitoring mechanism, right? We can't set expectations and go away, but we also can't micromanage, which is what we did at the beginning of this because we were afraid. So those intervals of checking in, having the conversation, what needs to change, I think that will help increase and bring about more trust in even a fully remote culture and environment.
Right. Another question, or if I may combine two questions, online meetings taught us the importance of icebreakers or gamification to make people much more engaged. Do you come up with some useful tools or tactics about that throughout your experience with this digital environment?
Yeah. So how fun do you want to be sometimes is what it comes down to. But let me give you the basic. The basic is to get everybody talking in the first minute. And that means you might have to do a breakout where somebody goes and does something with somebody and comes back, or if it's a smaller group, throw out a question and have people go around and contribute to it. You can also do chat. You can do it either way. I think the silly, funny icebreakers that we get are specific to groups. I've had people say things like, what's everyone wearing on their feet today? Something that has to do with a pet at home, sort of silly, funny ones. Those are more casual and they work well with really tight groups that know each other. They certainly don't play well with client meetings where you've got to, really ratchet up the formality and do something with more professionalism to it. So I think having something that's fun, but relevant to the group and relevant to where you're going, that's where you're in a win-win in those. If people are speaking up, but it's also engaging their head in whatever direction you're going, that's a plus.
Right. And then another question from the audience, are there different tools or resources that you can recommend for BRIO method?
I'm sorry, for what methods?
For the BRIO method. BRIO.
For the BRIO method. Yeah, so that's something that we came up with ourselves. It's a Tuck School feedback method, but Serdar, I'd be happy to send you the briefing that we have on it. There's a quick 2-pager on it. And there's also some references to a lot of other great feedback information these days. So happy to share that with you if you want to make that available.
Sure, share it with me. Then I will drop the link to the comment bar after our session, and our guests will be coming back and checking the comment section and finding the link there. So we'll make them watch the video again. It's a win-win situation for everyone. So let me go through if there is anything left unchanged, unanswered. So I think there's another question about style of communication, Julie. The audience says that we see that Julie has a very calm style, which I agree. Which style does she suggest to leaders? Is there a specific style that works the most throughout this digital communication?
Well, be yourself. That's what I think. I think this has been a time for so many people to really bring together our multiple personalities into one that works for what we're trying to do. And so I don't think there's one style at all that's good for everyone. But I think the most important thing about that is to figure out what your style is, what you're comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with, who you want to be. And if you're not sure, play a little bit. And that's where I think, recording yourself, talking out loud, thinking about it. I use my hands a lot. It bothers some people. Other people like it. Those are the things that, we have to experiment with. I think one size fits all is really boring. I think different types for different situations and a fair degree of variability is what makes it interesting. So my advice there is just find your own and play with it and go with it.
Yeah, I was lucky to attend Julie's classes a couple of times. Mm-hmm. And I remember you saying that while you are presenting, please don't use right to left pointing out, from left to right pointing out. So I think this is the most important trick that works in these Zoom environments, because at the end of the day, you can see yourself doing this and this. So I'm really happy to express that. Julie, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to host you. Always good to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time today.
Oh, it's been my privilege, my pleasure. Thank you, Serdar, and great to be with you again.
Değerli izleyiciler, sevgili konuklar, bugün Dartmouth Tech School'dan sevgili Julie Lang'i ağırladık. Bize iletişim tarafında, özellikle liderlerin içinden geçtiğimiz günlerde iletişimi nasıl daha etkili kurgulayabilecekleri ve mevcut araçları nasıl daha etkili kullanabilecekleri konusunda hem teorik hem de çok pratikte kullanabileceğimiz noktalarda bilgiler verdi. Çok teşekkür ediyoruz kendisine. Sizlere de bu akşam bizlerle birlikte olduğunuz ve bizi dinlediğiniz için çok teşekkür ediyoruz. İyi akşamlar diliyorum. Sağlıklı kalın, mutlu kalın efendim.